Callum, thanks so much for joining me today.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's great to be here, Johnny. Thank you.
For those who don't know, could you please let them know who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Callum Woodcock. I'm the CEO and founder of Wineify. Wineify is a next generation investment platform that makes it very straightforward to invest or gain exposure to fine wine as an asset class.
Excited, we're going to get all into that. Yeah. But I've known for a couple of weeks how the first thing I want to talk to you about, because on my research running up to this episode, I did find your TED Talk.
Okay, nice. I thought that was locked away in the YouTube archives, but no, that was the Bright Lights of Aberystwyth, I think, that TEDx Aberystwyth.
Yeah, it was good. And I don't want to steal your thunder in this. Can you please let people listening or watching know what was the subject of?
Yeah, sure. So the TEDx talk, the theme was, why does everyone hate millennials? Basically looking at how different generations have been perceived throughout history. The general theme being young people, no matter when they were young, whether it's in the modern day or 2,000 years ago, were always regarded negatively by older generations. And I thought, given the heat, shall we say, that millennials get or have historically gotten, it's an interesting topic to explore.
Well, I really enjoyed it. Being an elderly millennial myself, I'm 35 this year. I'd always thought the realization you came to was that people just hate younger people or older people. There's always like someone looking for kind of like some conflict, whether intentionally or not. But yours, you went back. Went to the 1920s, then we were in the 1700s, and then you started like going back to like the Stoic philosophers. You got Seneca in there. Yeah. Do you remember any of the quotes? Or
I do. The one that really stands out was the English guy writing in some newspaper in the 1700s, where he basically says that the young men of the new generation coming through, I think he calls them like emaciated fribbles who could never have descended in a straight line from the heroes of Poitiers and Agincourt. So, you know, the archers that fought at those medieval battles, which is kind of like, you know, an 18th century snowflake kind of summary there. So I thought it was interesting.
How's your philosophy of that come as you're moving into your 30s? Are you starting to think negatively about the younger generations, or?
You know what, there is some, it's very interesting to be looking at myself now.
Yeah.
And so I'm 30 in June, so it's a bit of a sore point for me at the moment. But I've only become aware of the last few years that there is a generation that is an adult generation that has slipped in like below millennials, effectively. So Gen Z, whatever you want to call them. And the first thing that struck me was like the difference in slang that's used. So in my previous role, we had a number of new grads in the office, very much from that generation. And I found myself discreetly like Googling the words that they were talking about, you know, going on Urban Dictionary to find out what they meant, which felt, you know, suddenly I felt very out of the loop. And there's little cultural things. So our generation doesn't really use TikTok in the same way that generation would. You know, even like the whole purple backlighting revolution that has really come through, you know, where everyone's got backlights around their rooms. It's not something that we would have had, for example, when we were that sort of age. So you can certainly notice generational differences, but I think, you know, animosity, whether that's, you know, generational or in any other walk of life, always comes from misunderstandings or a sense of otherness that you don't fully comprehend. So I'm trying to learn from those, you know, the examples in that TEDx talk and not kind of think of Gen Z as being radically different, because ultimately it's just a series of cultural trends, isn't it?
Well, that's why I kind of wanted to bring up from the bat, just because it's quite interesting, right? As much as we don't want to become, it's the Batman quote, either die the hero or live long enough to yourself become the villain. It's like you were aware of these nuances between centuries of older and younger people, and it's like, is the risk that you're, as whilst the people in your office is like, oh my God, slay. You're like, what does slay mean?
Well, I mean, I think the final straw for me is, I think I say it in that TED talk, but I remember, so we're filming this for our listeners' knowledge. We're filming this in Southwark, and I used to live in Elephant Castle and work at Blackfriars, so in the JP Morgan offices in Blackfriars. And every morning on the way to work, I would walk past these billboards that were for the British Army. And I don't know if you've seen this ad, it was like 4 or 5 years old now, but it was like, me, millennials, like we want you, like snowflakes, we want you. And the idea being you've got great attention to detail, you look at little details and all these things, but the overall message that was being conveyed was basically how badly this generation was perceived. And I thought, you know, we have to, if I'm going to do a TEDx talk, I really want that to be the theme, because it seemed like the outer perception of my generation or our generation, not that I'm particularly defensive about our generation, but it seemed like we were copying so much more flack than generations that had gone before us. And it's interesting to see that that's not the case. When you look at all of those examples from history, maybe social media has made it easier for people to voice their opinions, but Seneca the Elder has been complaining about young people. So, nearly from the beginning of recorded history, which I thought was very, kind of interesting, quite liberating in a way.
Well, so then going back a little bit, Callum, if we're talking about the youth, let's talk about Callum's youth a little bit, because
Oh God.
we've had conversations about about the school, the areas you've worked in.
Yeah.
But if you could give the listeners a little bit of background about your experience, where you come from, who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I'll start university days. So grew up on the outskirts of London, and a bit of Dorset, a bit of Devon. I've sort of moved around a lot. Went to uni in Bristol, so had 3 very happy years at Bristol. Left to move into asset management. So I did the classic grad scheme route of joining. So I joined a major investment company, Fidelity, on their sales grad scheme. So always on the sales side as opposed to the research side. After a stint with them, moved to JP Morgan Asset Management, which was a fantastic start to a career. Working in a big organization, you have a lot of resources available to you should you choose to utilize them. There's a lot of very intelligent people there who you can learn from. But I ultimately always knew that I didn't want to be part of a large organization.
Before that, or there were certain things when you were within the organization where you were like, it's not for me?
Well, so it's an interesting one because my dad's a founder. So he'd built and sold 2 businesses. He started his latest business, which is a venture-backed SaaS company, in his mid-60s. So very much an entrepreneur at heart. And I think there's probably a degree to which, my teenage self, when I was trying to work out what I wanted to do longer term, looked at that example and thought, wow, okay, he's done that. I want to too. So maybe there's a little bit of that going on. But I think, it was really only when you start working in a big organization with that thought at the back of your head. So thinking, okay, I want to be a founder. I want to start a company. And this is no disrespect to JP Morgan. As I said, I think it's a great place to start a career. But I remember the thing that I found frustrating, knowing where I wanted to get, was I couldn't work out how the organization fitted together. This is my second job. I'm 3 years into my career. There's 250,000 employees globally, 12,000 in the UK. And I remember thinking, I know what products we're selling and I know the teams that create those products, but I don't understand who else, like pretty much everyone in this building is, the roles they do, how that fits into the wider strategy. And I just had this realization that, I'm at the wrong company if I want to be a founder. I need to understand from an earlier stage how a company fits together.
Why did that matter to you though?
I think it's just because without that experience on the ground, any idea of starting a company seemed just nebulous. Like it seemed like a complete fog, because ultimately now in hindsight, you need a product, or you need a way of distributing that product, and everything else is the operations that tie the two together.
Sure.
But that's very easy to say, several years into your career, started a company, read widely about the subject, you have more of an understanding. When you're 23, 24, and you're just starting out, a lot of those steps that you need to take to start a company are very ill-defined. No one is really giving step-by-step guidance as much as or at least not that I could find at the time, as much as many, people are sort of claiming that they can. Everyone's journey is a little bit different, and you often have to figure it out for yourself. And I just thought, I need to get to a smaller organization where I am going to understand how it fits together and be able to reverse engineer that in order to start my own business. So I ended up joining a scale up, not a tiny one, but about 150 people. So much more easy to understand than a large investment bank is. And then after a master's at Cambridge, so I was doing a part-time master's alongside working at this company in entrepreneurship. I ended up joining an early stage startup as employee number 3, their commercial director, first go-to-market hire. And I think for me, that was a real game changer, because I was at a very early stage of an organization, and we got to define together, myself and the CEO, define the go-to-market strategy, who we were targeting. We were getting feedback in real time from running big outbound campaigns. We were understanding, who we could serve and how. And basically had this experience of finding product market fit with this organization. And I think without that experience, I wouldn't necessarily have had, confidence is the wrong word, because I don't think I would have been lacking that, but I don't think I would have started Wineify as early as I did, because it was such a proof point. You know, there's a sense where you show yourself that you can do something, and then you go, well, you know, I've done this for someone else. It's time to do it for my own idea that I've become passionate about at that point.
How happy were you in these places?
You know, I think that the JP Morgan brand name in particular has helped build a degree of trust in the Wineify brand just through association. But at the same time, I was not especially happy at that sort of organization for the very simple reason that I felt like my life wasn't my own. So I felt like I was working towards an objective that wasn't something that I knew I wanted to be doing long term. So, you know, I knew I wanted to be a founder, and it felt like I was off almost on a side quest by working at these organizations. Again, super grateful for the opportunity to have worked there, but I think I knew that it wasn't really aligning with what I wanted to do longer term. And as a result, it was, you know, you do feel stuck. And that's why I knew I had to get out of there. And it's easy with the benefit of hindsight to say, okay, well, you know, this is the path to starting your own company. But, you know, I remember being 23, 24 and thinking, you know, I have no idea what the next step is, which is why I joined a scale up and did a master's, because I thought, okay, do those two alongside each other. I'm sure I'll meet someone that ends up leading me somewhere. So, you know, it sounds very first world problems, what I'm saying, but I think anyone that has been stuck in a role where they know they want to be doing something else, no matter how good that role is, will have experienced what I'm talking about. It's like a sense of frustration, but also a sense of slight helplessness, because the path forward seems so foggy. And that, you know, looking back on my 23, 24-year-old self, it's very easy for me to dismiss that person and say, you know, if you just did this, this, and this, you know, you'd have started a company 3 years, 4 years before you did. But you almost have to go on that journey and work things out for yourself before you are ready. I since we're doing quotes today, I can't remember who said it. It may have even been like a Tony Robbins type of figure, but it's something along the lines of, you know, the challenge isn't in becoming a founder; it's in becoming the type of person that is a successful founder. And I thought that's an interesting way of looking at it. You know, you need to have learned experience, you need to have setbacks, you need to do a lot of your own figuring out, because I have read, and I honestly can't tell you how many books on entrepreneurship, sales, and everything I've read, because it was my way of feeling unstuck, even though I was unstuck. So theory-wise, great, but that means absolutely nothing unless you apply it. And then you can work out for yourself what works, what fits with your personality, what fits with your style. And if you're not willing to take that first step towards founding a company, you're never going to be able to apply that information. So it remains theory.
Same as university, right? People can go off, learn different subjects, but at the end of the day, you know, the amount of people I know who did business degrees, then they go and try and start a business or work in a business, and the old archaic information is completely irrelevant now, and it doesn't matter. If you're not doing something and actioning it and getting in the mixer. The people who did the summer placements, they learned more in those 3 months than they did the previous year. So
yeah, I completely agree. So Wineify is 6 months old. It's older, but we launched publicly, 6 months ago. And I love the feeling of looking back at the business we were in December. And for our viewers' sake or listeners' sake, we're recording this at the end of February. I cringe at the things we were doing in December because I think, how little did we know back then? Yeah. And I know as a result, in 2 months' time, I'm going to be looking back at what we're doing now. Hopefully not this interview.
No, this is going to be the highlight of the 6 months, right?
Yeah,
Minus
exactly.
outside the business bits.
What is he talking about?
So for those who are sitting in an office, feeling unfulfilled, not enjoying it, who maybe do want to do their own thing, what would you recommend for them?
So I think the first thing that I would do in hindsight, and I don't know why I didn't do this sooner, but is get mentors who have done it before and ask them how they did it. It is so obvious. And I spent 5 or 6 years not doing that, or having very sporadic conversations when I should have met someone who'd been on a similar journey to the one that I wanted to go on, and just learnt as much as I could from them. So I started doing that, don't get me wrong, but it was kind of 3 or 4 years into my career when really I knew what I wanted to do from day one. So I should have started cultivating those relationships on day one. It's very easy for me now to think I should have started at an early stage startup so I could understand how everything fits together, that issue that I didn't have when I was at JP Morgan. However, I do also think there is an advantage to having a big brand name on your CV early in your career. Not to keep mentioning my dad, but he always talks about the fact that before he set up his own business, he did several years at Accenture, or Arthur Andersen as it was then, and then did 9 months at McKinsey. And he is still introduced on stage as, this is his background, ex-McKinsey.
How funny.
And I mean, maybe it's him writing the description.
You're going to have to ask him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. It makes it less cool if that is the case. But that is, I feel, what a big logo like Google or JP Morgan or,
of course,
whatever the company might be, it does give you an idea, or it gives someone else an idea of the kind of background that you're from, and
holds a certain level of clout and authority.
Yeah, and I mean, it gives my mum something to talk about, at least.
In our initial conversations, we spoke a lot about what your values were and your morals, and the big thing to you was transparency.
Yeah.
And I'm curious how that ties into everything we've covered up to this point.
I have always had a bit of, a peeve is the wrong word, but a suspicion of people who say one thing and do another. And that becomes really apparent in business when you are dealing with someone, whether that's a supplier or a client or a prospective customer, whoever it might be, investor, and they are saying one thing, but you get that very human sense of, I don't know if you mean this, and almost always that intuition ends up being correct. If you've had that, it's very rare that person then comes through and delivers on what they say they will.
Yeah.
Or you just have this sensation, you are uncomfortable doing business with someone for reasons that you can't necessarily put your finger on.
Well, I read an article years ago, and it was about trust your gut instinct, because your gut instinct is actually a very complex brain response to reading a situation.
Yeah.
And you have to trust it.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where often you end up trusting the other party if they are transparent in a way that they would possibly think is detrimental. So if someone says to you, look, I've got these 2 products, this one is really well priced, but you could probably get this one for a cheaper price across town, just to give you an example. You are much more likely to buy both of those products from that person. 1, because it's more convenient, but 2, because they built trust with you by almost admitting a flaw. And a great example with Wineify is, we often tell customers how we buy from the open market. And, the advantage to them is we don't hold stock. We've got no, we've got no incentive to buy wine, above essentially the lowest market price or below. So any advantage we can get, we pass on straight to them. So that's the advantage to the customer. Yeah. But I'll always add, the advantage to us is that we don't hold stock. So we haven't got that operational cost that comes with storing wines that we haven't sold. It's much more scalable from our perspective. And that weirdly seems to build trust, because it's not just, here's another sales point.
Yeah.
It's also, well, this is why we do it from our perspective. And that's a quite wordy explanation, but it does make people go, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Well, so before Wineify though, where did that come from?
So is it the desire to build a transparent business?
Yeah, or to be a transparent person? Is there things that have kind of happened, experiences where you've been burnt, or maybe you did something you weren't proud of?
Yeah, I've never done anything that I'm
No, I mean, none of us have, obviously.
No, of course not. So I think that if you're in an investment, if you're running an investment company of any type, whether that's BlackRock or whether that's Wineify or whether it's anything, people are trusting you with their hard-earned cash to deliver certain outcomes. And I think my experience of trying to build a wine portfolio remember, wine in and of itself is unregulated. So anyone can effectively set themselves up as a wine broker. And whilst the majority of the trade are very well-meaning and very professional, it inevitably attracts some shady characters.
Some people are always looking for a hack.
Exactly, or and often, sadly, like flat out frauds, as any real kind of investment does. And there's been a few notable wine frauds over the years. So because investment grade wine has to be stored in bond, the end client doesn't necessarily have eyes on the wine, so it's very easy for someone to just tell them that wine is there when it's not.
Yeah.
But there's a load of different ways that you can commit wine fraud. You're selling it at way too high a price, selling non-investment grade wine that's never going to appreciate, because it's an esoteric alternative. So the informational asymmetries from people working within the trade to those outside the trade are enormous.
Well, I assume you're up against it a bit as well, right? People have been burnt, or the bad actors previously.
Yeah.
You're not just going into an easy industry being like, listen, we can do this. Some people are a bit trepidatious.
You're completely right. And that's where the transparency thing is so important, not just from like a values perspective, but it is important to me to be transparent, because I think if I was to feel that we were doing something that wasn't in the best interest of our clients, I wouldn't sleep very easily at night knowing that. And the great thing about buying at the lowest market price or below is we're happy to give our customers receipts for the price that we purchased those assets at. So they have proof that, one, we own the assets, two, that they're now under our customers' names, but also the price that we bought the wines at. So we are very transparent in that regard. But it filtered through the other day. So we had a situation where an error had meant that a wine was priced at £100 more than it should have been. It was still right at the bottom of the market, but we had acquired it. We guarantee the lowest market price or below, and we had acquired it for something below the lowest market price, and we had priced it at the lowest market price. And I thought, this is something that client's not going to notice, but we wouldn't be living true to our values if I didn't send him. I ended up sending him a WhatsApp voice note, sort of very sheepishly saying, hi, we've noticed that we actually owe you £100 because we guarantee this and we didn't deliver that to you. And he responded so warmly to that.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who spent £15,000 on wine, so it's not necessarily he's the £100 might be relatively immaterial, but the fact that we were willing to go back, we were reconciling receipts, which is how we noticed. The fact that we were able to highlight that and say to him, we owe you this money, and then seeing his response, I was like, well, okay, that's how we build. That's how you build trust.
Totally. It's not even a goodwill gesture. You did the right thing, but that kind of action obviously builds trust. He'll remember that. He'll talk to people about that, and the long-term gain from that is obviously above and beyond.
Totally. And he'd signed off. He'd signed off an order form for the wines at the price that he acquired them for. It's just we knew that we had acquired one of them for £100 less, and because we make that guarantee, we were like, well, we have to honour it now. 3 months in the future. So
that's how it works. Why should I invest in wine, Callum?
I think historically you've been able to achieve really compelling returns. So we've just come out the back of a 5-year bull run in Burgundy, for example, which saw the Burgundy 150, which is the investment indices for Burgundy, outperform the NASDAQ by 30%. So some really compelling returns to be had. But from a professional and sophisticated investor standpoint, the reason that we seem to be finding as being the most compelling is uncorrelated stable returns. If you're in an uncertain market, you want an asset that you can fly to that is relatively safe. Gold has historically performed that role. Wine is increasingly performing that role. And then in some circumstances, as you mentioned, wine is exempt from capital gains tax. So important caveat, always check with your tax consultant or check with your accountant as to what extent your own wine holdings are. But basically, HMRC defines a wasting asset, which is exempt from capital gains tax, as one having a useful life of less than 50 years from the point of purchase. So when you buy the wine, as opposed to when the wine was bottled. That means that most fine wines are, exempt. A fine wine might be fine, but you're only going to find out if you uncork it, by which point the value of that wine will be ruined. And most. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. And for example, most critics, when it comes to looking at the useful life of a wine, will use the drinking window. So they'll say, okay, drink from 2024 to 2044. So if the drinking window is within, a 50-year time frame, there's a strong argument to HMRC to say that that is therefore a wasting asset.
You're building Wineify.
Yeah.
You've reached, after that period of not being happy, not building your own business, you're now here.
Yeah.
You're building that business. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Yeah, good. It's really exhilarating.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's ups and downs, but I have to constantly remind myself, one, of how far we've come, the progress we've made, but two, that I would rather be doing this than anything else. And how many people can say that?
Yeah.
I was listening to an Alex Hormozy podcast the other day, who's I really like in terms of his ability to convey information in a really clear to understand way. So like a business podcast guy. And it was either him or one of his guests started talking about how building a business is like being repeatedly punched in the face. And that's kind of what my experience has been like. You have days where everything is going well, you're absolutely flying. And then you have other days where the news that you're expecting to come in doesn't, something falls through, you're just not feeling great yourself. And the one thing that has been really reassuring to me, really as a human being, is thinking like, when you're in your kind of dark moments and you're like, this is never going to work, or this element of the business is never going to work, or like, why did this have to happen? Why is this person acting like that? Is I would rather be doing this than working in any other job.
Yeah.
And that is an amazingly powerful realization, because you go, I might be having a hard day or whatever, a hard week, but there is nothing else I would rather be doing. And I'm prepared to put up with all of this in order to, continue building this company that we think is going to be category defining. Yeah.
Well, it's a grit thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're building something, nothing is ever going to be plain sailing.
Yeah.
So you just have to constantly keep pushing and pushing. And I assume you feel your skin getting thicker, right? The
Totally.
more these things happen, the more you're able to brush them off. What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing?
Grit is the exact word. It's resilience, the willingness to keep pushing, and also to be aware of your own progress. People have big, lofty goals. The 100 million under management. That would be a huge goal. But in order to get there, you need to break that up into small milestones. So it's things like at the moment we're celebrating our first few B2B sales. Big milestone.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well, we're 6 months in. We've gone from being a complete unknown in the market to now being a trusted partner of some fantastic businesses.
Totally.
We were lucky enough to receive investment from a strategic partner called Coterie Holdings, who own a number of wine business interests. So Lay & Wheeler, IG Wines, a huge network of warehouses, a wine lending business called Jera. And they are run by some heavyweights within the wine trade. So the CEO of Coterie, Michael Saunders, was the former CEO of Bibendum. Their chairman was the former CFO of Berry Brothers. So these are real wine trade royalty who have taken a position in Wineify and are, really helping us scale and have removed any operational barriers to scale, because they can see we're doing something new in the space and they see the opportunity to collaborate. 3 months ago, that would have seemed like pie in the sky to me, that we would have attracted that sort of interest from these venerable figures within the wine trade. So it's important to look back at the progress that you're making, especially on the days where you feel like nothing's going to work. You're waiting for that deal to be signed that could be game changing. It gets to the end of the month and you want to be able to report certain figures to your investors, and you need something to come through before you can do that.
You almost preempted my next question, but I'm still going to go for it because you didn't cover it fully. Because you're talking quite honestly and directly with me. You're like, oh, it's important to do these things. It's important to register this. It's important to realize we've got to this point. But every entrepreneur I sit down with for the podcast is very good at saying this.
Yeah.
And then when the cameras are off, not so much at doing it.
Yeah.
And I've already said on to the next thing. And I meant, when I said it 2 minutes ago, it was in the positive pushing through.
Yeah.
But the negative of that is the constant what's next means people rarely or never do appreciate not just how far they've come, but like that day's win or that week's win. And do you think you're getting good at doing that? Are you doing it? Have you been skipping it entirely?
I don't know if I'm getting good at it. I'm trying to do it. I'm very lucky to work with a fantastic consultant, a guy called Hugo Bakula, who's very good at reminding me of that.
Nice.
But I think as a person, I'm quite 0 or 10. So either, everything is going right, this is fantastic, or, one day, everything's going wrong. I keep pushing through it, don't get me wrong, there is no part of me ever that is going to give up. But my perception is often all or nothing.
Yeah.
And that's not especially useful. I think there are good features of it because when you're up, it's fantastic. You bring people with you and it feels like everything's going well. But I'm trying to moderate that a little bit. So I heard the CEO of a business called Vint, who are a fractional investment platform in the US for fine wine, so doing something very interesting. He spoke about how he tries to keep himself between a 4 and a 7. And I've taken that on board quite a lot because I think between a 4 and a 7, it's, your expectations aren't too high or too low.
Yeah.
And that's where I think you need to be most of the time.
Where you kind of at the moment 1, 2, 9, 10.
Exactly.
Okay.
Like celebrate the wins and celebrate the distances, but you don't need to, none of them are all or nothing. Every day is just it's a series of actions and behaviors that eventually lead to an outcome. And really the way that you feel about it is it's about you. It's about, how well have you slept? How much exercise? Well, I'm putting this on me, but the things that impact me are, how much you slept, how much have you spoken to the people that you care about, how much have you exercised? Those are the 3 things that make a difference to me. And lo and behold, if I have been keeping those habits, if I have been getting enough sleep, if I have been exercising regularly, if I have been, taking time to speak to the people that are important to me, inevitably the days feel, there's more good days than there are bad days.
Yeah.
And the other is true. So I think a lot of this is whether something is good or bad really comes down to the subjective frame of mind that you're in at any one time. And, if you lose a big deal or something doesn't go according to plan, there's always things that you could improve. But ultimately, there is so much outside of your control that to really beat yourself up about it is not useful or realistic. It's more like, well, learn what you can from that outcome, move on to the next one. It's the same with the wins. I love the Churchill quote, success isn't final, failure isn't fatal, it's the courage to continue that counts. I don't know if that is a Churchill quote or a pseudo-Churchill quote, but I think that's a beautiful way of summarizing the mindset that I'm trying to develop, because I don't think I'm there, and it's not my job to sit here and say, okay, I've got all the answers, I'm this super entrepreneur. I can only talk about my own outlook and what I'm trying to cultivate within myself at this moment in time.
Callum, that would almost be an amazing place to end. I'm going to push with one more question.
Cool.
Because what's one thing that you have to remind yourself of each day?
So the phrase that I keep coming back to when I think about this is just ask. Like whatever problem you have, name a problem that someone else hasn't been through. There is 100% someone out there that has been through that problem and solved it or found a way to cope with it if they can't solve it. Find who those people are and ask them how they did it. And this stems from, my delay, I guess, in starting a business because I didn't have that level of understanding. And then it's no coincidence that the moment I started asking people about how they did certain things, you interviewed Hugo Tilmuth. He was one of the many people that I asked. It's no surprise that then suddenly things start happening. But it's anything, whether it's, mental health or getting the body that you want or, visiting somewhere, whatever it might be, there is someone else out there that has been through that and that you can easily find and contact because everyone's on social media and they're posting about it. Or a friend of a friend will know someone who knows someone. And it can feel like you are going through things that are entirely like, you're on your own. And that's just not true at all. That's your brain tricking you. So I think if there's one piece of advice from my own life that I've seen beneficial is just ask.
Perfect. Callum, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. I hope that wasn't too candid, but thank you. It was a pleasure, Johnny.
I appreciate it.